The wind moved across the Montana plains like a lonely spirit, carrying the weight of all the memories this land refused to forget. Caleb Blackwood felt that weight every day. At 38, he lived in a silence so deep it felt alive. It clung to the old boards of his cabin, to the dusty floor, to the empty chair across from him at the table. His life had become a rhythm of work and stillness, a quiet march through days that never changed. Most of the valley believed solitude suited him. They did not know the truth. They did not know about the 3 weathered crosses on the hill behind his home. One for his father, 2 smaller ones for the family he lost. Caleb rarely looked at them. The memory of that fever-ridden week was a scar. Nothing could heal. So he worked. He mended fences, tended cattle, and slept in a house built for a laughter that no longer lived. He asked nothing from the world, and he expected nothing from it. That was before the woman with the guarded eyes arrived. Her name was Ara, though most people in Redemption called her that new girl at the mercantile. She stepped off the stagecoach with nothing but a worn valise in her hand, and a silence around her even heavier than Caleb's. She was in her late 20s, pretty in a soft, quiet way, but it was her eyes that caught attention. They were wary, watchful, holding secrets she refused to share. The town did not welcome mysteries. Women whispered behind church doors. Men watched her as if she were trouble simply waiting to happen. But Ara kept her head down and worked hard, sewing, sorting shelves, earning her place with the kind of determination that suggested she had no other choice. Caleb first saw her on an ordinary afternoon, standing behind the counter as she measured cloth. He had come for flour and nails, nothing more. But when she looked at him, he felt something shift, something subtle and unsettling. Her eyes held the same shadowed grief he carried within himself. Their exchange was simple. She gathered his supplies. He paid. Their hands brushed for a moment, and she flinched just slightly, as if even the gentlest touch reminded her of something painful. Caleb didn't understand it, but the image of her stayed with him long after he rode home. A week later, fate forced their paths together again. The storm arrived without warning. Morning skies turned the color of old pewter, and by noon, the wind howled like a living thing. Snow fell in thick, blinding sheets, erasing the world in white. Caleb knew the danger. Blizzards in this part of Montana killed with quiet cruelty. He was checking the northern fence line when his horse stopped, ears pinned, refusing to move. Caleb peered through the storm and saw the dark shape. A wagon tipped on its side, a horse struggling in the drifts, and beside it a figure half buried in the snow. He dismounted and moved as fast as the freezing wind allowed. When he brushed the snow from the fallen body, his heart kicked hard against his ribs. It was her, Ara. Her face was pale, lips blue, lashes heavy with ice. Her pulse trembled weakly under his fingers. She had been delivering a package for the mercantile, unaware the blizzard was coming until it was too late. Caleb hesitated only a moment. His life was built on avoiding complications, on keeping every door to his heart shut tight. Bringing her back meant letting someone into the quiet he'd spent years protecting. But leaving her meant death. He scooped her into his arms and placed her in front of him on the saddle, wrapping his coat tight around her shaking body. The world vanished into white as he urged his horse toward home. Hours passed in exhausted silence. When he finally pushed his cabin door open, the storm roared behind them, hungry for anything it could take. Inside, he laid her on his cot and worked to bring her back to warmth. He fed the fire until the cabin glowed orange. He rubbed life back into her hands and feet. He spooned broth between her lips. She never fully woke, only whispered words in a language he didn't know, and cried out in her sleep, as if haunted by things worse than the storm. For 2 days, the blizzard trapped them together. He rarely spoke, but he listened to her restless breathing. He learned the shape of her silences. He saw how she recoiled even in dreams when he tried tending to her wounds. Someone had hurt her once, badly. He could see it in every frightened twitch of her fingers. By the 3rd morning, the world outside the cabin shone white and still. The storm was gone. He helped her into the sleigh, ready to take her back to town. They spoke more on that short ride than they had the day he met her. Simple words, careful ones, but each held weight. When he dropped her off at the mercantile door, something unspoken lingered between them, something neither of them was brave enough to name. Caleb turned his horse and rode away, but the silence of his land felt different now, as if something had stirred in it, as if the life he believed was finished had just begun to change. The peace that followed the storm was short-lived. For a brief time, Ara tried to return to her quiet routines at the mercantile. She kept her head down, sewed torn clothes, stacked shelves, and avoided the curious eyes of redemption. But the town was not as gentle as the snow that had nearly taken her life. Whispers followed her everywhere. Looks trailed her every step. And soon, those looks turned into something sharper. The trouble began with the Holts. Martha Holt, the preacher's wife, believed every woman should be exactly where she put them, in neat, respectable boxes. Ara did not fit in any of them. She was too quiet, too careful, too alone. And in a town that feared anything it couldn't explain, she became an easy target. One morning, Martha discovered a silver locket missing from the mercantile display. A search was made. Shelves were pulled apart, drawers yanked open. And then, as if it had dropped from the heavens itself, the locket appeared in Ara's sewing bag. The room froze. Mr. Henderson stared at Ara as though she had personally betrayed him. "Stealing?" he said softly, as if the word itself disappointed him more than anything else. Ara's heart plummeted. She shook her head slowly. "I did not take it." But her voice was small, and the town had already decided. That day she lost her job, her reputation, and what little security she had fought so hard to keep. For 2 nights, she stayed locked inside her small rented room above the mercantile, staring at the last few coins she owned. She couldn't stay. She had no money for food, no hope for another job, and the whispers below her window grew louder every time she heard footsteps on the street. On the morning of the 3rd day, with her courage stretched thin like an old thread ready to snap, she made the only choice left to her. She rode out to Caleb Blackwood's ranch. She found him outside splitting wood, the cold morning air swirling around him. When he saw her dismounting the tired rented horse, he set the axe aside. He didn't say a word, just watched her with those quiet eyes that missed nothing. She swallowed her pride and stepped closer. "I lost my position," she said, her voice shaking. "I have nowhere to go. I will work for food, for a place to sleep. I can clean, sew, keep your books, anything." He didn't answer right away, and the silence stretched so long she felt her heart breaking under its weight. Then, finally, he nodded toward the small old cabin near the cottonwoods. "You can stay there, and help with the ledgers." He paused. "I can pay some wage, and your keep." Relief crashed over her so strong it stole her breath. She bowed her head, unable to speak. He returned to his work as if the decision meant nothing, but it meant everything. Their days soon fell into a quiet rhythm. She handled the ranch books, cooking simple meals, mending worn gear, He repaired fences, worked cattle, and brought her fresh-cut firewood without being asked. They spoke little, but something wordless grew between them, something steady and fragile, like a candle flame in a drafty room. One night, the wolves came. Their howls tore through the darkness like ripping cloth. The sheep paddock near the creek erupted in panicked bleating. Caleb burst from his cabin with a lantern and rifle. Ara, hearing the chaos, sprinted from her cabin, shawl clutched tight around her shoulders. "Wolves," Caleb said. "Keep the lantern high." They worked side by side without hesitation. His rifle cracked across the valley, while she shouted and waved light through the swirling shadows. A frightened sheep slammed against her, sending her stumbling into a split-rail fence. Pain tore across her arm as wood scraped deep into her skin. But she kept going. When the final wolf fled into the trees, Caleb turned toward her, breathing hard. "You're hurt!" "It is nothing," she whispered. But when he pushed aside the torn fabric of her nightdress sleeve, the lantern light revealed not just the fresh wound, but something old, something jagged, something burned deep into her skin. A brand, a mark belonging to a name spoken only in whispers across the territory. Silas Kane. Caleb froze. Completely. His breath left him. His world seemed to tilt sideways. He knew that brand. Everyone did. It belonged to a man whose cruelty had carved scars into Montana itself. A man believed to be gone. A man connected to the most horrible story Caleb ever heard. A homestead burned, a couple murdered, a young wife lost to the flames, a wife who was never found. Ara's face crumpled when she saw the look on his. She tried to pull her arm back, shame and terror twisting through her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice breaking. "Please, not again." He caught her hand gently, not to hold her still, but to steady her. His voice was low, shaking with something heavy and fierce. "Ara, I'm not afraid of you." And then, with a tenderness at odds with his rough hands, he stitched her wound, never looking away from her eyes. It was the first time she understood. Caleb was not like the others. Caleb would not abandon her. Caleb might even be willing to protect her from the past that would someday come for her. They didn't know it yet, but that past was already on its way. Silence returned to the ranch after the wolf attack, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was the kind that settled before a storm. Something in Caleb had changed the night he saw the brand on Ara's arm. He moved with a new protectiveness, a new purpose, as if a fire had been lit inside him. Ara felt it too. She slept easier in her small cabin. Her nightmares grew softer, fewer, and for the first time in years, she felt something like safety, something like hope. But hope in the Wild West rarely lasted long. The trouble began the day 3 shining wagons rolled into Redemption. Fancy men stepped down in polished boots, suits too clean for the dust of Montana. They carried papers, maps, smooth smiles that didn't reach their eyes. And leading them was the man the territory whispered about, Silas Kane. He wore a fine coat. His hair had silvered. His smile was polite and charming. But his eyes were the same cold steel Ara remembered from the flames of her past. She was at the mercantile that day when she saw him. Her world crashed inward. The spool of thread she was holding slipped from her hand. She couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't move. The years between now and the night he destroyed her life vanished like smoke. She ran out of town, ran down the long dirt road, ran until Caleb's ranch came into view. Caleb saw her stumbling toward him, her face white with terror. He reached out. She flinched away. Then she whispered the name he feared most. Silas Cain. The man who killed her husband. The man who branded her. The man who burned her home. The man Caleb had sworn he would never become. Fear turned to fury inside him as he gathered her shaking body into his arms. "You are safe here," he told her. "I will not let him touch you." But safety was no longer enough. Cain wanted the valley. He wanted control of the water. And he wanted Ara. The attacks began slowly, first with lies, then with legal papers waving false claims over Caleb's land. Then came sabotage, poisoned cattle, fence lines cut, townsfolk turning cold and suspicious, following Cain's promises of wealth. Cain's message was clear: sell the ranch or be destroyed. But Caleb would not bend, and Ara would not run again. Their bond deepened as the danger grew. Nights spent talking by the fire, quiet moments tending wounds, shared grief, shared strength. And finally, on a stormy night, when the weight of everything became too much, they let their walls fall completely and held each other as if the world were ending. Because in a way, it was. Then Cain went too far. He killed Jed Mills, Caleb's old friend, staging the death as an accident. Caleb saw the truth in the tracks left behind. Ara saw it in the sheriff's cowardly eyes. They sat together that night, staring into the fire, the loss cutting deep. Ara's voice broke the quiet. "No more running," she whispered. "He has taken everything from me. He will not take you too." Caleb looked at her, and in her eyes he saw the strength of every survivor who refused to be broken. "You and me," he said. "We end this." Their plan was simple and dangerous. Caleb spread a rumor that he had discovered silver in a remote canyon on his land, a lie Cain could not resist. The trap was set. Cain rode into the canyon with 6 armed men before dawn. He expected to find Caleb alone, distracted, easy to kill. Instead, he found the Devil's Jaw, a narrow, unstable gorge where sound twisted and shadows played tricks on the eyes. As the men entered, a thunder of falling rock echoed through the canyon. Caleb had cut a rope, releasing a slide that sealed the exit behind them. Gunfire exploded in the dark stone walls, the echoes confusing Cain's men. Caleb moved through the shadows like a ghost, forcing them into dead ends, using the terrain to separate and overwhelm them. And above them, steady, calm, deadly, Ara lay hidden on a ridge with the rifle Caleb had taught her to use. She watched every movement, waited for every signal. When one of Cain's men tried to flank Caleb, Ara fired once. He fell. Step by step, the numbers thinned, until only Cain remained. Cornered against a rock face, his fine clothes torn, his arrogance stripped away, Cain aimed his pistol at Caleb with shaking hands. "You could have had everything," he snarled. "Now you die with nothing." Then the crack of a rifle split the air. Ara's bullet slammed into Cain's shoulder, spinning him around. His gun flew from his hand. Caleb seized him, and the 2 men crashed to the ground in a brutal fight. But Cain, bleeding and desperate, scrambled backward. Right beneath a loosened boulder, the earth groaned. The canyon answered. The rock came down with a roar. When the dust settled, Silas Cain lay crushed beneath the land he had tried to steal. Justice delivered by the West itself. Caleb limped to Ara, blood on his shirt, pain in every breath. She dropped the rifle and ran to him, her hand shaking as she touched his face. "You're hurt," she whispered. He held her close, letting his forehead rest against hers. "It's over," he said quietly. "He can't hurt you anymore." Weeks later, winter softened the land once more. Snow clung to the distant peaks as Caleb and Ara stood on the hill overlooking the valley. The graves behind them no longer felt like wounds, and for the first time, the silence between them was not lonely, only peaceful. They had lost much, but they had found each other. And in the vast, wild beauty of Montana, two survivors began building a life no storm could ever take.